So Sam, why do media and materials have to be accessible? Why? What is the need for it?
So making media materials more accessible makes education more inclusive for everyone, and for some students it's crucial to their participation. So this is backed up by policies and strategies, both nationally and internationally. So for example, in Europe, the Web Accessibility Directive looks at creating more accessible web pages and web content across Europe. And we also have the UN Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities from an international perspective. I think particularly as we've gone through the COVID-19 pandemic, we've really seen an increase in the use of more accessible media materials and particularly assistive technology, and how that's really come into everyday use for so many people.
So Sam, you're absolutely right. COVID changed the world, changed the way we looked at things, changed the way we looked at media and materials. So how can we now go about making sure that we can use this in a successful way?
So there's a number of ways we can use accessible media materials. We can look at what a child or a learner specifically needs, or look at the fact that all learners have needs holistically. So in some ways we need to look at both. We can look at the wider context and hopefully by making all media materials more accessible and taking steps to embed accessibility within our work, we can reduce the need for individual interventions. Although individual supports are always going to be necessary, reducing them will really enhance everyone's lives. So some of the ways we can do that is we can create resources for staff, and work with resources that we currently have just to change them slightly. We can create and develop awareness of what accessible media materials mean, and how to create them. We can embed it within our day-to-day lives. So we can look at how we use our phones, how we use our laptops, how we interact with people. I think one of the really important things is coming in with an open mind, because we've been doing things the same way for years and years. And what we're talking about here is just new ways of teaching, new ways of learning, and really being flexible and trying new things out is one of the ways that we can look at accessibility in a new light.
But, so first of all, I'm sure everybody out there would like to know, so what do you mean by accessible media and materials? Is accessible the same as available media and materials? Can you give us some examples to make the materials more accessible?
So there's a lot of different ways that we can look at accessibility, and in some ways starting at what we're already doing and starting at what we do on a daily basis is probably one of the first things we should look at. So for example, when we create Word or Google Docs documents, so when we're using word processing software, there are a number of things we can do to make that practice more accessible. So for example, we can use headings that are built in, so the structured headings that are built into the software. When we're using URLs, we can put descriptions on those links, and make sure that our tables are accessible. In most word processing tools now, there's a way to check accessibility as we go through, and that's a really important thing to use. And in that way, we're only adding a small amount of time or effort onto what we're already doing, and eventually it will become second nature. When we've done that, it means that we can then start to use accessible PDFs. So once we've done that, that then leads to an accessible PDF document. And so once you've put in that structure in Word, the PDF then is much easier to use. PowerPoint and presentations also have some of these tools around accessibility checking. So there's an accessibility checker within the software And that looks at contrast, it looks at alt text, as does Word. And what is different there is it also looks at reading order. It makes sure that a screen reader will read through a slide in the same order as somebody who is sighted would read through that slide. And so that really creates a much more accessible presentation. One of the things that you can do with your documents is if you scan something in, and teachers are scanning all of the time, so when you're scanning in a book, obviously most of the time you then can no longer highlight text or copy and paste. And one of the things that you can do, which really benefits people who use screen reading technology or reading technology through pens or any other form, you can OCR that technology. So that's use optical character recognition technology to make that much more readable by those sorts of tools. And that can be done online using freeware, or there's more professional versions, or even Adobe Pro would have it. Yeah, so that's one of the other ways. One of the things that's used quite a lot is speech to text or text to speech. So speech to text is where you speak into your computer microphone or your phone microphone, and instead of having to type out something, the text goes in to the computer. And so that benefits people who are blind, but it also benefits those who maybe have a repetitive strain injury or a reason that they can't type. And I think it really benefits neurodivergent people as well. So for me, I use speech to text a lot of the time when I'm writing. If I want to write something quicker, or I'm finding it really difficult to find the words, sometimes talking through it makes it so much easier. And then text to speech is the opposite. So when you're using text to speech, it's kind of like using an audiobook. So it's not kind of like listening to an audiobook, except it could be your textbook or even like if it's a teacher who's using text to speech, it might be that they're listening to student papers or pupils' papers, and it's then for a lot of people that can be easier to comprehend. So if you have difficulties reading long pieces of text, that's ideal for you, but it's also useful for those who are, again, who would be visually impaired or blind. So there's some really great things out there that I think people are using much more commonly now in their everyday lives. And maybe they were originally focused towards disabled people, but now we're seeing them used everywhere. And I think the spreading of that availability really makes things so much more accessible, but then also means that we all get to benefit from this really amazing technology.
I mean, just yesterday, you by accident typed up something and it went into some audio file or something like that, or some text.
Yeah, so my phone apparently has transcription technology embedded into the system itself now, and it also has auto captioning. So if I'm having a conversation, I can now get my phone to put text to that conversation, which is fantastic. And I think there was an example given by one of the other authors of somebody during the pandemic who was using a mask, and so a deaf person couldn't lip read, and they put their phone using auto caption technology beside their face, and they were able to have a conversation with somebody in an emergency situation that would not have been able to happen otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, and so this accessibility is not just limited to making things specific for specific learners, but really for everyone. So, so this makes the text accessible. But what and what about making it more understandable? I've heard of, is it plain English? So you can tell me more about that.
So I think whether you're speaking English or a different or another language, often, especially when we're talking about academia or even education, we use a lot of language that people find it more difficult to understand. So I'm sure all of us have been in situations where you're in a conversation with somebody, often somebody who you maybe met for the first time or you really respect, and all of a sudden they use a word and you've no idea what that means. And sometimes you ask them, and sometimes you go back afterwards and look it up, and you're then able to take part in the conversation. But it really does stop people engaging. So plain English is using smaller words, using more commonly understood words, even if it takes longer, in order to make sure that everyone understands. So instead of using jargon, you're using 3 or 4 words to explain exactly what the concept you're talking about is. And it really means that everyone can take part. And I think particularly when you're talking about people who maybe don't use the dominant language of the place they're living, plain language means that everyone can be part of the conversation once they have some of the language that's being spoken. And some of the productivity tools that we see, so like grammar assisting tools, can really help with that, and really help with making some of that language more simple. And those grammar assist tools are one of the there's probably questions as whether they are like technology that makes things more accessible, but what you see is it does help with that plain English. It helps with teachers to make text more accessible, but it also helps people who maybe find it hard to find the right tone within a document, or who have difficulties in spelling or writing, to create an easier to read text, and hopefully will enhance a student's learning and achievement within a learning environment.
Yeah, I think the brief for our chapter is use language that is more understandable to a wider variety of students, of student teachers who will be using this, because not everybody's first language is English. And so that's good. And I know, for example, using a grammar tool really focuses your writing. And so sometimes you tend to go on long, and it really helps. So it makes students aware of the language that they're using, makes me aware of my writing.
So following on from kind of that look into what accessible media materials really is, and some of those examples of tools, what are the benefits then of providing accessible media materials?
I mean, I think it's in the name, accessible. So the whole idea is that we are responding to not only select students, but to a broader audience. And even the audience, students that need assistance, they are increasing every day. And at any stage, one of us could have a need for something. And it says, for example, there are 1 in 6 people living in Europe that has some form of disability, and the idea, as I say, is not to cater just for students with any special needs, but to cater for everyone. Another trend is that there has been migration of people all over the world, whether it's due to wars or rumors of wars. People have moved, and when you get into a new environment, you have to make sure that the language that is used in that environment is accessible for everyone. How do they go about learning that environment? And so providing access to the curriculum is a benefit. So and so we can use lots of tools to do that. Videos, podcasts are fantastic tools, even for our students. We know that students typically don't like reading lots of text, but if you can give it to them in a podcast, and for students who might have issues listening or viewing, we have closed captions. So anything that can make learning accessible, that's the benefit of using these tools. So the tools out there to do exactly that. And so that helps. The idea is to mainstream assistive devices and assistive technology and media, and make sure that everyone has access to it. The idea is to kind of create an equal opportunity use of media and technology. And the research has shown that almost 20% of students are currently using assistive technology, and 10%, this is a study that happened in 2020, and a survey that was done. And it says for 10% of those students, it was crucial for them to use it. So the idea is accessibility to all, access to all. Whatever you learn to use, it is of benefit to everyone. But for some learners, it is crucial for them to use it. And so teachers need to understand that aspect of what it is they can do in their class with technology. And you were speaking about speech to text. I'm like, this is a nice way of using it. Instead of sitting and typing up laboriously, if you can use speech to text and you can talk, you can get it out faster. It means children who have issues with ergonomic issues in typing, that supports them so well. So, I mean, the idea is to enhance educational performance, and if students don't have to struggle with now I have to type up, and just think about children with dyslexia, and so just talking about it, it's typed up. Of course, everything is not always rosy, so they're going to have to go back and check and make sure everything is right, but at least the hard task is out there. That makes learning more engaging, and students would want to be part of that.
One of the main aims of education is to advance critical thinking of learners. How can accessible media materials play a role in this?
You see, this is the beauty of it, because accessible media material gives that leeway, it's flexible, right? And so if you give learners the access to select, you tell them, this is what I would like you to learn, this is the goal, but you can select these materials, you can do it this way, you can use a video, you can do a podcast, you can read it from here, we give them the opportunity to select the media and the material that is most suitable for them, that they feel comfortable with. This engages them in learning, so it's not something that is foreign to them. They love just the chances of selecting and not having to do what everybody else does. There's that, and it gives them a chance to showcase what they have learned. And so creating a space where different levels of autonomy is given to learners depending on what the task is, and also according to their needs, shifts the emphasis on differentiating the lesson in itself only for learners with special educational needs, but allows the learner to customize the learning around their own needs and about their own interests. If you're interested in dinosaurs, why not speak about dinosaurs if that's going to bring and you're going to learn the skill that your teacher wants you to learn. So, and the abilities that they have, everybody has different abilities. And so with efforts such as these, then makes learners think critically, gives them more autonomy. More autonomy leads to critical thinking, and that's the ultimate aim of being at school. Yeah. So I mean, you showed a very good example, very good approach of teachers using a universal design for learning and incorporating technology into this, and how that enhances the whole lesson for everyone. Yeah. So, but there's still some hesitancy among teachers. So what stops teachers from using this? What are the challenges and barriers to using it? Because we've just showed fantastic examples, but I'm sure there are things that prevent people from using it, or seemingly to prevent them.
I mean, there are a number, but I guess one of the things that people might think is, like, isn't creating media materials really expensive? And it can be, and assistive technology in particular can be very expensive, and particularly high-tech technologies are often associated with really high cost. But for individuals who require complex adaptations, the great benefits from these technologies can't be understated. There's often a more long-term cost saving in society by investing in technologies that really grant people greater access to education and the ability to reach their full potential. In some cases, the cost of this technology can result in quite a large resource to schools, and so allocating that is important. However, there's also a lot more integrated versions in technology we already own and use of many of the different assistive technologies that we've spoken about. And so this is now on mobile phones, as we said, on computers, web browsers. So a lot of those have text-to-speech and speech-to-text already built in. Magnifiers are now built in. So up until quite recently, you would have had to buy a specific magnifier if you wanted to increase the size of the screen. Now that's built into the computer. So we are seeing a huge cost reduction in what it would have cost to find technology that made things more accessible. And many of the technologies available now have a free version. And so they may not always be as effective or maybe as seamless. However, this allows for trialing in a lot of cases, or perhaps that is what's needed, and there isn't no need to get a professional version, but in some cases that allows for trialing. And so teachers and students or parents can test the effectiveness of that technology and see if it meets those needs that are there. And then, if necessary, a more expensive solution might be bought.
There's a stigma about using technology, and especially using technology that is only catering for certain learners. And so then people, back off. What is your take on that?
Yeah, stigma can definitely be one of the things that can prevent people from using assistive technologies and accessible media materials as well, especially when it looks maybe other than what other students might be using. And stigma is really that kind of mark that links somebody to what would have been undesirable characteristics. And I think the key thing there is, if something is seen as undesirable, that's what we can change. So we can change how these things are seen within our society. So stigma isn't linked to a functional limitation. It's not for disabled people, for example. It's not linked to their disability. It's linked to how society and the world sees the disability. And so if we can frame our conversation differently around disability, about accessible media materials and assistive technology specifically, we can change how people see the technology itself. So young people using very specific adaptations might feel that this makes them different to their peers, and kind of feeds into that othering that I think can happen within classrooms. In order to reduce that stigma, there's so many solutions available. And I think teachers can be really creative as they look at these. I think they'll probably know best what way to do that with their classroom, with the age that they're working with, because obviously changing how something is seen is different when you're talking about a 4-year-old than when you're talking about a 17-year-old. But one of the things you can do is that mainstreaming, is that integrating technology into the classroom, making it something that everyone is using bits and pieces of. Maybe they're using it slightly differently, but it's available for everyone using the same device or using the same tools. And so that will then reduce the stigma attached. So like if it's on somebody's phone, well, you probably aren't using your phone in class, but if it's on a laptop, it's on a tablet, and the person next to you is using the same tablet, they're just not maybe using the magnifier, there's no real difference to how you're engaging within the classroom.
But remember, we don't need a magnifier. We just zoom out
Yeah,
and we zoom in.
exactly.
So, yeah.
So another method you can do is looking at the accessibility devices and how they are designed. And so one of the really commonplace things that's been done with, not only how they're designed, but also how they're spoken about. So I think, yes, teachers probably don't get to choose how they're designed, but they do get to choose how those things are spoken about, and they can make sure that it's introduced in a really positive way. So one of the things that was done around was glasses. So at the start, glasses were a medical device. People really didn't want to use them. They were to provide adequate vision to people. And then they were changed. The way that they were seen was changed, and they were styled. And now for a lot of people, they're a fashion statement. The big fashion houses are part of the design of what glasses look like. And at this point, lots of people are using glasses in their everyday life, and it's not just people who absolutely need them in order to function. It's anyone who needs them to any extent who's using them. One of the things I've seen in Ireland is around the design of wheelchairs, and so there's an organisation that's looking at providing covers for wheelchair wheels to make them a much more positive thing that somebody's using, and taking away some of the stigma for children who are using wheelchairs, or children and adults, but making it something really cool that a child has, that they have a really colourful thing on their wheels. So I love these examples of really how to reduce that stigma, how to change the conversation, and not to position diversity and difference as a bad thing,
Exactly.
but as something that's just part of our lives and part of our classrooms, and that diversity can be celebrated. And I think teachers really have a fantastic opportunity and role to play within those conversations, and trying to change some of that feeling of stigma for people who maybe may have a disability, maybe speaking a language at home different to they do in school, any diversity.
So Thomas, Sam just told us about the costs involved in gaining access to materials. But I'm sure the other thing that bothers teachers, that could be a barrier to teachers using media and the materials that they could use in our UDL lessons, would be how long does this take? Does it take a lot of my time in putting this all together?
Like, that's a good question, and I guess the answer isn't really that simple. It really depends. What we see when we work with a lot of educators is that, it really is about designing from the outset. So if you design from the outset, and you have Sam mentioned earlier, about the accessibility checker and having that on while you're creating your documents, that's really important, because that kind of gets you ahead of the game. But trying to retrofit, that can take a lot of time. So if you've already created the material and you're trying to backtrack on your accessibility, that takes a lot longer time than designing from the outset. Sam talked about, this optical character recognition. Sometimes it's a very simple process in terms of making something accessible. So it's a case of just having that, online thing where you can upload a PDF, and within maybe 30 seconds you get back an OCR version. And if you have professional softwares, it takes even less time than that again. And so a lot of schools and a lot of people who require this OCR, they often have literacy softwares where converting from an inaccessible PDF to an accessible PDF is part of what comes with that package. So a lot of students and pupils would have that in their school system already. The other thing as well is what we're seeing now, because of that, we're seeing this real kind of mobile technologies taking over. So what we're seeing is a lot of kind of apps that almost have made, requiring large scanning devices become obsolete. So we have tools like Seeing AI, which you can just download for free on your phone, walk around, you can scan any piece of text, it'll start reading it.
Wow.
You can just take a picture of it, it'll convert it, and then you can use text-to-speech to read it back. And Microsoft have a tool that does something similar, but you can actually link it and save it as a PDF, as a Word document, as a PowerPoint. And Microsoft uses this tool called the Immersive Reader, which is like a literacy suite of tools that support learners, and that's embedded in the app as well. So you can after you've scanned in the image, you can edit it and format it and customize it into whatever way you want to engage with the technology. So and that embeds with that Office 365 suite, which we see in a lot of schools already. And this immersive reader thing, this also comes in things like Microsoft Edge. So if someone wants to read a PDF or wants to read something off the internet now, in terms of accessibility, they can just open up Edge browser. This immersive reader is already built in, so they can read PDFs, read web pages, or do whatever assignment they have to do. Now, when it comes to things like captioning, that gets a little more difficult. It depends on whether you want auto captions or human captions. So auto captions, like, they come free with things like YouTube, Panopto, Microsoft Stream, a lot of the main products that are used in educational environments. But the problem is the accuracy of them can vary significantly. So again, it depends on the quality of the microphone, it depends on the quality of the speaker, it depends on the quality of the content. The difficulty, I should say, really, of the content in terms of how accurate those captions are. And so it really depends. If you have someone who's hard of hearing, you need to have human-based captions, because auto captions could be 50 to 70% accurate, and that's too much information that's missing for someone who relies specifically on someone who relies specifically on captionings. But we're seeing a lot more people rely on captionings. We have students where English isn't their first language, and we have students, from all sorts of backgrounds that find that using captions actually benefits them in their day-to-day practice. And then there's like real-time captioning versus, say, post-production captioning. Like real-time captioning services, again, you're relying sometimes on these auto captioning services that aren't really that great, but now there's kind of new solutions out there, new products that have enhanced accuracy in terms of auto captions. So you can use them in real time, whether it's a desktop application or something you see online, or you can there's a lot of companies now doing kind of post-production captioning, where if you, as a teacher, create video content, you can upload it to this cloud, and within a certain time frame, it'll send it back to you with the video captioned. But that's a cost-specific support. So, it isn't something that's cheap. But again, we talk about cost versus time, then that always kind of comes up depending on how quickly you can do it. Because sometimes if you're, as a teacher, and you want to give someone in your class, perfectly human caption based, and you don't have a budget, it can take a significant amount of time to caption those, go in individually and make sure that everything that you said, and it can take time. So again, it depends on resources, and it depends on the kind of time that you have.
Yeah, I can see how all of this saves teachers time. It's a matter of just knowing what is out there and how to use it. Thank you. As we were discussing, these are brilliant tools to use for everyone. But how does the teacher make it all? There's such a lot out there, yeah? And you've mentioned some of them. But how does the teacher make it all come together coherently? Make sure that, is there an approach that the teacher can use, approaches that teachers can use to kind of package all of that together?
There are definitely a few different approaches that can be used, and one of those that's often used, or is starting to be used much more, is the Universal Design for Learning, so UDL, Universal Design for Learning. And so that's around embedding accessibility in the classroom and designing from the offset, so it's designing from right at the start to meet the needs of every learner within a classroom. Universal Design for Learning is becoming more popular now, and it's really important that accessibility is a focus there. Because what is universal if not accessible? So I think that's a really good place for teachers to start to really embed accessible media materials in their curriculum, in their classroom, to ensure that every student can benefit.
So where can we get access to information about creating accessible content? For example, there's all this material out there, but is there a place where teachers can go to get guidance as to how to put all this together?
Especially at the moment, the availability of technology is constantly evolving. We're seeing new products coming out extremely frequently. So you don't need to be aware of everything. I think that's the first thing to say to anyone who's coming to this is, there are ways that you can stay better informed, but you're never going to find everything. So just take it easy on yourself. Find your local accessibility or assistive technology expert, if there is one in your area. And often, I'm sure if you ask nicely, the local university will have somebody who's working in that area. And they will also know if there's anyone else within the area outside of there. Make use of freely available resources. So there's lots. So for me in Ireland, that's AHEAD. So that's the Association of Higher Education Access and Disability. And they provide a lot of information about assistive technologies. But those sort of organizations are available in lots of different spaces. And if there's not one in your region, there's also a lot of other places you can go. For example, Microsoft has resources, Google, whatever technology you're using, there's probably a how-to guide that tends to be fairly good. If you don't find what you're looking for the first time, the first technology doesn't work for you, don't be disheartened. Try again. Like, there's going to be hurdles, there's going to be technologies that don't work as well as you'd hope they were going to, but there's probably something else out there that might fit your need.
And Thomas spoke about AHEAD as a tool that has a website. So students, when you're listening to and watching us, go to the text. It's all there. We've got lovely links for you to watch.
So that's how we might look online and find, or look online or find people who might have information about different technologies. How do we make teachers aware of available media and materials and tools that can make their lessons more exciting and get better access for learners?
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned a lot of information that is available out there, and sometimes it's good to give teachers a little bit of training, some seminars on how to access material, and so because it's good to know which materials are out there, what is out there, and I know students who are listening to us will think, what is out there? So, have, I think, schools to organize some training, just make them aware of these are some of the things that are out there, and then show them how they can use these tools and these media and materials integratively in the lesson. So it's not a matter of taking it out and just putting it in a lesson, because it might not work then, and then teachers get discouraged. So the idea of having some training to say, here are tools, but use it this way because you have these learners in your class. This is the demography of your class, and so it's just not add on to lessons. It really should be embedded in lessons, and so that the lesson is successful, and so the training should be hands-on, and it should help give the teachers a chance to experiment and to see what works, what doesn't work, and help them to become comfortable with accessing materials and using available materials. Getting comfortable is a big deal, because otherwise if people feel hesitant about using it, they're not going to use it. I mean, just remember when you started using a computer and you started typing and you lost things and didn't save, and I mean, now it's so automatic, you don't think about it. It's because you got comfortable. So the idea of accessing materials and using materials is to just get comfortable in using it. And so the training should also give teachers guidelines as to critically select the material. What is good for my classroom? What is good for the learners that I have? And what is good for the topic that I'm using, so to the matching. And I think when lessons are successful, teachers are motivated to use it, because if they use the wrong materials and the learners are confused, then it does not work. So training around these areas is key. I think the worst part of it is when teachers are sitting on their own and they think, there's such a lot. You know that when you Google something, a myriad of things come up and you wonder, is this the right thing? So this is why it's a good idea to have groups, communities of practice, as we call them. And I borrowed a statement from a brilliant statement that says, and I'm going to read it to you, alone we are smart, but together we are brilliant. And so this idea, this concept behind community of practice is just that belonging to a group, whatever that group, whether you're coming together in the staff room to discuss and plan lessons together, or whether you're doing it virtually with the staff that you have, and even wider, maybe subject teachers getting together and saying, and then someone saying, oh, I found a brilliant link that helps my learners in this way, and it helped this learner, and using best practice examples. These are the kinds of things that motivate teachers to use media. If they see, oh, it worked for that one, then it possibly could work for me. And so the added advantage is that we are sharing materials that have been proven to work. And so, and these are also the kinds of groups that help teachers grow professionally. But we don't have to just stop these communities of practice with just teachers. Learners can also be put into groups, or they create their own groups as to maybe platforms of learning then. And the added advantage of having, if they're working on a topic and they work together, they're using technology to work together, and they share this. So the accessibility of media and technology helps. And what it does also, it includes more learners in a way that possibly, if they were in a classroom or were told to create just a group, there are some learners that may be excluded. But if everybody is on a social media platform or a WhatsApp group, we're all working together, and some of our differences then are not so noticeable, and so it creates an inclusive learning environment. And so and then we can also use parents. We can also bring parents in and say, there's a technology, there's WhatsApp. Remember, WhatsApp wasn't around back in the day, but everybody has there's a WhatsApp group for everybody, and people communicate. So parents could, for example, speak to each other, speak to technology that helps their children, and share those ideas. So the more people engage in using media meaningfully, the more it benefits their children, and so that is the whole aim about using technology.
So if communities in practice, so we spoke about communities in practice, and kind of as we look at the way forward, that's one of the things we've identified as one of the things that really could be the way forward for teachers as they look to the future and implementing this within their environments. How can we expand these community of practices to the broader school community?
So the idea of increasing accessibility of media materials, the onus should not just be on teachers. The responsibility shouldn't just rest on teachers to get access. But this should be a school-wide responsibility, and drive to gain access. So the school management, the senior school management, should plan the budget, and the budget should include, for example, continuous professional development, and so that would include the training and around different aspects, but for this the topic on accessible media to support and materials to support learning would be one of it, as well as you were explaining that there are some tools or media that maybe needs forking out some money, and if teachers have used the free trial and said, I think this can work for me, they should be able to go to the staff, to the management, and say, this is available, and I've tried it out, it worked this, and here's the evidence that it works. Based on that trying, They should then, the trials that they've done, they can then ask for the money. So a budget that covers that would be wonderful, so that teachers know that they have, the school has their support. And what these tools and media sometimes come with, they have examples, they have templates, you know, so it makes the teachers' work also a little bit easier, because they can use the templates and adjust it to their classroom. So it takes off some of the workload of teachers. So if there's a template that they can use, why not? Why do they have to design it from scratch if someone has done it before? So the community of practice should be extended to the whole staff. So if they then take the focus from teachers only, the school management also needs to be kept in the loop in terms of, this is the new technology, this is where people are going now. In my community of practice with my group of teachers, they say this and this and this has worked. We should use it for our school as well. And so the school management should be informed in terms of the latest trends that there are. And this can, it does not just have to be school-wide, it can also be in different school clusters, for example. So in this area, this can work for a number of schools. And who's to say you can't get it? I mean, we're talking about, you know, everything is about economics, that this cannot be bought. If more are bought, it becomes cheaper. We know that the price demands. And so the idea that teachers have information, the idea is to share it with everybody. So information should be shared, and this is what the communities of practice is all about.
So, I mean, I love the idea of communities of practice, particularly because I think they allow us to find good but imperfect solutions, and often training expects us to be perfect. So I love the fact that you can make mistakes and learn together from mistakes that are made. I love them as a practice.